Anyone that's been to Israel knows to expect the unexpected. It is a land full of paradoxes, ironies, dichotomies, and contrasts. These four elements are exhibited in a potent brew in a small bookstore called Olam Qatan, in English meaning small world, and indeed it is. In this small world, you'll find a variety of spiritual beliefs, musical modes, and the search for truth and meaning, which so many people in the world come to Israel for. Hello, Yaakov.
Elana, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, I've got a million questions, but we'll start with one.
Okay.
What can you say about all the different representations here of books and music? This seems like a junction of East meets West.
Well, it's Jerusalem, for sure. Yes, it is. Well, I have one friend who talks about Israel as the west coast of Asia. And there's a lot of currents that meet in Jerusalem. I think of three in particular, three kind of border crossings. And one is religious and secular. And there's a lot of us folks who are somewhere in between. Israeli society traditionally has been very polarized, between the two extremes. But people are seeking, and this is a place that's supportive of that. The other one is Mizrach Ma'arav, East and West. We could say Sephardic and Ashkenazic, but we need to understand that Sephardic really represents a much wider world of Jewish people from Islamic countries, including Iran, including Yemen, places that aren't really Sephardic, but are part of the Islamic world. And by the way, music was traditionally a Jewish profession in much of the Islamic world.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. I once heard Yair Dalal at a concert say, the reason they sent those missiles at us from Iraq is because we stole all their oud players in the 50s. It's like, whoa. And unfortunately, they had nobody to play for when they came over here, except very small ethnic communities until about the 90s. There are three crossover points.
Okay.
The third one is Jewish and Arab.
Okay.
And sometimes that's Jewish and Islamic, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, I think. Sometimes there are some very good oud players in Israel who are Christian Arabs and who play with Jewish people or teach at the Center for Oriental Music, but they're Arabs. So that's often the one people want to focus on, But it's one of three important borderlines here. But there are, within Jewish Israeli society, there are these other ones that are very, very important in terms of the culture and in terms of people coming to wholeness. Part of the nice thing about being a spiritual bartender, it's not my job to tell people where to go, what they're supposed to find. I'm just here to open the doors that people are looking to knock on, and oh, you want mindfulness? Well, we've got this. You want Jewish renewal? We've got this. So back to our books.
So Yaakov, we're here in Israel, a land of conflict, a land that draws for the good and for the bad, people that can stray to the fundamentalist, radical side of religion, Christian, Jew, and Arab. Here in this store, you seem to promote a reconciling, a harmony of those beliefs through enlightenment. How would you describe that enlightenment?
Well, first of all, I want to say something in the macro, in the outer world about Jerusalem. As you were talking, I was flashing back to the Whole Earth Catalog. I don't know if you remember that book. It was a very important book in the 60s and 70s, right? And it had they were the first people who were very enthusiastic about the photograph of the whole Earth taken from space, and they would put it on the back cover of every Whole Earth Catalog. And often the caption was, "We can't get it together. It is together." And this is part of my feeling about Jerusalem. It's a place of pilgrimage for Muslims. It's the heart and soul of the Jewish people. It's very, very, very important to Christians. It's important to the whole planet. And most of the time, we live together here. And more sharing, less sharing, but we all live together in this city, and in some sense there's an ecological sense. There is not just a heavenly Jerusalem, but the earthly Jerusalem works. So I just want to express that and express my gratitude for living here. And people come even from Tel Aviv, never mind from all over the world, and say, how do you bear it? How do you do it? How do you live here? And it's, hey.
I'd like to point out a problem that people have in digesting some of the information that you've been talking about in the positive light of the application of Islam. Mm-hmm. There is an application to Islam that is negatively viewed by a lot of people. It's fundamental, it's radical, it promotes death and violence to anybody that does not believe the same way that they do. As someone that is educated in the Islamic belief, what is in that belief that lends itself to people that have a bloodlust, to people that are wanting to promote their belief, force it on others, and if they do not surrender to their belief, because I think Islam means to submit. Is it to submit?
To surrender.
Then if they can't convert the person, then they have a duty to kill them. There are people that believe this, are there not?
Well, I don't want to climb inside other people's heads and represent their belief system. My interest in Islamic Sufism obviously is not an interest in that. But let me throw out a couple of possibilities. My teacher Zalman talked about developmental stages. He said Islam has now been around for about 1300 years. When Christianity was around for 1300 years, we had some pretty horrible things going on in the name of Christianity. We had the Spanish Inquisition, we had torture and persecution of Jewish people and other groups, the conquest of native populations in North and South America, Islam is now approaching its adolescence. And so there are energies that come out with adolescence that can be destructive, that are very ferocious, that are very fierce. And this is one explanation. Another explanation, very simply, is, well, for a long time, most of the 20th century, we had communism as the opposing force to corporate capitalism. And as much as I'm a believer in free market and the good points of American and Western democracy, there is a voracious exploitative aspect of that the planet is suffering from and traditional peoples are suffering from. We all know about that. And so now the communism has fallen as an opposing force. Islam has risen as an opposing force to corporate capitalism. And, well, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to say no to some things about corporate capitalism, so that the Muslims are doing it. Now, the unfortunate side of that is, of course, the exaggeration. You have the worst, in some ways, the worst of America represented sometimes by its government, not the present government, but, okay, in recent memory. And the worst of Islam represented by those who are stealing the limelight by their violent acts. And why are we here? Why are we here on the west coast of Asia? Why are we here in Jerusalem? Why are we here in Israel and the other Middle Eastern countries? We're here at some kind of meeting of the two. There's a wonderful quotation in the Quran. God says, I created you different peoples, many nations, so that you might know one another. I think we're here for an exchange of gifts. We're here to compare notes and see what we can learn from each other, or what we can learn from each other that will remind us of the things, valuable things we have in our own heritage. And so that's what I'm trying to, I'm not the only one, but that's what,
Can I just interject here?
Yeah.
You're very inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Islam seems to be, for the majority of Islamic applications, exclusive. If you do not submit to Islam, then there's no other belief system that they seem to allow others to embrace.
Okay, let me address that. Yeah.
Is that because of the Quran writings? Do they contradict themselves? What is it that they seem to find? What is there also at the end of the road let's say, do they believe in a messianic age? Do they believe everybody's going to be Islamic? What's their utopia going to be like?
Okay, Islam is not as future focused. There is an idea of al-Mahdi, there is an idea of a figure to come in the future. But Islam as a whole is not as future focused as Christianity is. In general, in my understanding of history, Persian dualism and the seeing of this ultimate struggle between the forces of good and the forces of evil, the angels and the demons, this comes from Persia, from Zoroastrianism and other Persian religions, and it had a strong influence on all three Western religions, strongest on Christianity. Judaism also became oriented towards a messianic idea that's not there in the Hebrew Bible at all. It doesn't exist in the 5 books of Moses, if you read it carefully. You can interpret it, but it's not there in the simple reading of the text. And even the figure of the devil isn't, except as this conversation regarding Job isn't there in the whole Hebrew Bible. Okay, so the wonderful thing you have in Islam is a recognition of all the prophets. You know, if you say, I love Muhammad, but I hate Jesus, or I hate Moses, you can't be a Muslim. Not just a Sufi, a Muslim. That's not acceptable.
So,
to be a Muslim, you're emulating the way of Abraham, that's represented by all the prophets, and some of them who are familiar to us are mentioned explicitly in the Quran, definitely includes Moses, Jesus, as well as Muhammad.
So a good Muslim that's well versed in the Quran, actually reads the Quran, he wouldn't have a tendency to try and subdue others through violent means. That would be anti.
There's a teaching in Islam that all babies are Muslims, and that all the prophets were Muslims. That doesn't mean followers of Muhammad who pray in Arabic. That means people who are submitting themselves to the reality, which we call God, which has 99 names, 99 adjectives in Islam, has many adjectives in Judaism, but has many more actually in Islam. So Islam is about devotion and submission to that divine reality. Now Muhammad provides an example of that for Muslims, for the community. But there are really two meanings of Islam. One is this submission to Allah, which simply means Ha'el, the divine. That's all it means. It makes sense to a Hebrew-speaking person. Allah is Ha'el, the God. It's the generic word for God in Arabic. And the other is the specific meaning of the community. Muhammad has his community, as Moses has his community, Jesus has his community. And it shouldn't be a problem. So we have to distinguish. Some of my Palestinian Sufi friends, when they talk about extremists, they call them new Muslims. They kind of shrug their shoulders and they say new Muslims. It's very similar in Judaism. Sometimes we shrug our shoulders when we talk about Baalei Tshuva, about people who are newly religious in Judaism, because the new ones sometimes get a little literal and fanatical at first, you know, until you mellow with the tradition and you see the give that the tradition itself allows for. But one thing that any Sufi will say, God has 99 names, but the first two we mentioned again and again and again. Bismillah, in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the compassionate, the merciful. When in doubt, go for the compassionate and the merciful. Don't jump to wrathful names of God. You know, it's not smart. It's not God's way. God makes it very clear. Start with compassion and go from there. And this is, I think there is value to Jewish people, Western people, seeing the beautiful things, the good things in Islam. I think it's incredible that most of the Buddhists and the yogis in America, you know, there's Buddhist poetry, but it's not like Rumi. So many of the spiritual seekers, I don't care, so many of the spiritual seekers in America have Rumi's poem by their bedside. And this is very important for the world. We need to hold light to, regardless of what they do in Iran. I'm publishing an Iranian Hebrew book about the Sufi poet who spoke Persian that we love, and we're going to continue loving him. And if it's a problem for you guys, that's just too darn bad.
What are the main differences between Western musical modes and Eastern musical modes?
Well, in the West, we have major and minor. From an Oriental point of view, it's two modes. We've got, you know, different major and minor scales starting with different notes. But what I learned when I studied a little bit at the Center for Oriental Music, from an Oriental point of view, it's kind of boring. You have like basically two modes, and that's like you spend your whole life there. Like, come on. So in Oriental music, you have 10 or 12 principal modes, and 100, 200 variations of that. So it's a much richer world, and I think Israel and Turkey have the most interesting East-West music scenes going on, because people naturally know the Oriental music. They're located in the West, they're interfacing the two, their society is interfacing the two, and the soul is responding to this, and beautiful things are happening in both. I'm a little bit of a bumblebee, maybe kind of a little bit cross-fertilizing as much as I can. So
well, it's a wonderful education.
Okay, thank you. We've got all this great East-West music in my shop, but part of what's wonderful about living in Jerusalem is you actually get to meet some of the people who write some of the books and make some of the music. And so Jonathan has been a friend of mine now for a few years already. He's also a great cook. I love going to his house on Friday nights. His oldest daughter is named Ada, and we kind of have a connection going now for years. So we're good friends, and in his own path, he's connected very much with Judaism, but also felt a draw to Islam, to some of the spiritual values of Islam, and integrated that in his Jewish music. And I'm just delighted to know him, to feel a little bit less like I'm not the only crazy person here bridging these worlds. And I love his music, so I'm very glad John's come by with his oud this morning and share with us a little bit.
John Nelson, right? The Jewish wasp, although your music doesn't sound like a Jewish wasp.
No, it sounds like a Jewish fly.
A Jewish fly. Another anomaly. My favorite, I've listened to this CD and it's become one of my favorites. And I would like to hear Psalm 100, if you could sing it in both Arabic and English and Hungarian and Mongolian. If that's not a problem.
I sing it in Arabic. On the disc I sing it in Arabic, and one of my friends, musician friends, sings it in Hebrew.
Okay.
And probably hard to pull off in English.
Okay, so maybe just Arabic then.
Okay.
But so this is
maybe a little Hebrew if you feel like.
Yeah, I can do both.
On the very top of the lyrics, you say this is a tribute from King David. Is that what you say?
Well, this is from the Psalms, the Book of Psalms, Psalm 100. A song of thanksgiving is how it's usually translated into English.
Okay.
And in general, the book is attributed to King David, although some are obviously not written by him literally. But in general, that's sort of the spirit and the character of King David as this musician and personally connected to God in his life through the trials and tribulations of being a king, of being a prophet, of being a friend, of being a lover. All of this finds expression in the words, I think, which is why the Psalms have reached so many people and have become this vehicle for personal connection with the divine. And, well, for various reasons, that seemed like an apt choice for the words of this song. Snippet.
Okay, thank you.
That was Arabic and Hebrew.
Wow, just listening to you, I didn't expect to hear that coming out of you. That's wonderful. It's wonderful. Could you just share a little bit about the title of this album, Eden Mikedem? What that means?
Well, Eden is Eden, like the Garden of Eden, and Eden Mikedem is literally in Eden from the east, which is apparently where, according to the Bible, God put put Adam, the first human being, which is probably pretty androgynous figure at that point. So they call it the human being, is put there. This is the place, so maybe Eden was a larger place. I wouldn't say just geographically, probably some kind of plane of existence. And in that place of Eden was this garden, which is where we know the story of the Garden of Eden from. And for me, I relate to this story very allegorically, and don't take it as like a literal historical accounting of something that happened. But for me, and I think many people in the world, it's a symbol. It conjures up this either memory or imagining of the past where we all started, where the human story started.
The heart of Israel is extending itself to be understood and to understand, and to respond to man's search for meaning, for peace, and for truth. Perhaps at this epicenter of the world, the vanishing point is pushed further ahead towards a future of enlightenment. This is Elana Watson, reporting on behalf of Israel Vision TV.